This is the March 19th interview with Ruth Hawley. She's the daughter of Stella and John Lynch, granddaughter of William All Hands Lynch. And she's talking about memories of her childhood. And in this episode, we're going to continue her talk on what happened after the crash of 1929, and her father moved them out to her Uncle Clyde's place, where her mom was going to be a cook, which is really astonishing to even think about, because she was famous as being a bad cook, as far as I remember.
No, she was a good cook.
But, well, in my memory, not.
Well, she was, though.
Okay, but anyway.
Didn't want to happen most of the time.
Okay, so anyway, what happened? What happened? After you moved to Burwell? No, you moved to
Sydney.
Sydney, okay.
We sold our car because that was the only asset we had. He had quite a nice car, and he sold it for a couple $100, an almost new car.
Mm-hmm.
Because times were closing down, and so we had no car, and Clyde saved us from death and destruction by he loaned my dad one of his trucks. I assume he had to drive it in from Big Springs to have it there, so we loaded up what we had in this house where we were living. We were paying $15 a month rent and no money to pay that even. We went 6 months without paying the man that was a Masonic brother of my father's. He let us stay on there because he knew we were caught with everything gone down the tubes. So we had Clyde's truck. It was his better truck to load up the furniture, and Howard Lynch was there. He was a teenager, and it was the height of prohibition. And Howard was a smart pants. Oh, God, he was a smart aleck. And they would get the stuff loaded in, and we're ready to take off, and he pulls out, up from underneath the load of furnishings, he pulls out a bottle of bootleg. And my father, oh, my God, that's all he needed to have that take place, because he'd been in jail. That was bad news to have bootleg, anything to do with it. And Howard had that bottle of bootleg whiskey that he'd stuck in there.
Which Howard are you talking about? Your cousin Howard?
Marion's brother.
Okay, he was old enough to have that?
Well, he counted. He was 16.
Okay.
Yeah, he was roughly 15.
Okay.
He was old enough to know better.
Okay.
Because Uncle Ray spoiled both of those kids terrible.
Okay.
And he was a smart aleck, and I remember my dad just, oh, get that out of here. He just lost it because he was upset anyway at the situation, and then have that bottle of bootleg showing up, get us all, and trying to get away from town with no money or anything except Clyde's. He did give us the help to get us out of town, because we had 6 months in of free rent of not being able to pay the rent. So we took off with our load of furniture, and then we could store it in one of Clyde's granaries. That was all the furniture, and it was nice furniture that was bought in better times, lovely things. And we got out there, and Stella was to be the cook. So some reason Mrs. Brayton was the cook's name. They went somewhere else. I don't know what happened to them, but my mother was the cook. And we had the back rooms, which was Beulah's apartment when she would stay there with him. Back, it had a nice ranch house and had a nice place to live. And I was a mile from the country schoolhouse down the road, and of all the things, it only had 2 or 3 weeks left to places. There again, my dear mother fell on her head to make things easy for me. She gets me all dressed up, and I walk down there to that schoolhouse all by myself and announced that I was a new pupil. Well, of course, the girl that was she took me in and registered me in the books, and I was a student there. I had no idea what the school system was there in the country school. From I had to pass the county exams to go up into high school, because it would be to go into the 8th grade. To go leave the country school, I had to, well, crying out loud, I had no more training than a little canary bird with a cat in a cage with her. I was at that mercy, and I had to do it. Well, I was just it's wonder I didn't have a stroke. It was always something like that with my mother, that she never thought anything through. And I could no more pass the county exams than fly. And I was up to scratch as far as the city school was all right. Well, it just happened that the school system there at Sydney was very strict. And they had a superintendent of the schools that he'd been working in the state penitentiary running the educational system, and he was tough. And nobody had any mercy for anybody in those days. And, well, I thought I just see myself failing. It wasn't in my makeup at all to fail my grade. I had passed everything from the city school system. And it was only a question, I didn't have to go at all. She just kept me home. It would have all been avoided. And not enter me in the country school, because I think it was 2 weeks I went. And I had enough of the school year. I wouldn't have had any problem going to city schools to have to pass that crazy exam.
But did you pass?
Well, it just happened that my father, it wasn't anything to do with the school system, but my father, the branch, the guy took off and left everything, and he stole the team of horses that was going with, that belonged to my father. And you couldn't blame him, because it'd been nothing but crop failures and miseries, and he wasn't a bad person, and my father could have had him thrown in jail for stealing. The neighbors knew where the horses were even. And he never did a thing to throw a stone in this man's path that was the tenants that lived there before because they didn't hurt anything, and they did as best they could. And my dad said, well, if you had to steal a horse to keep alive, you couldn't blame him, and he let it go. So anyway, we took Kyde's truck that he loaned us to use, because we had no transportation except he had this old truck that was one of the oldest ones of its kind in the state, but it still ran. And we drove up to Sydney. We had to use a big truck to get our furnishings up there, and then they switched but he had this other old truck which he loaned to my father until we could get a car going of our own. And we moved, and it just happened that this farm that my dad, the ranch, had a beautiful home on it that was built by a southerner who was going to raise breeded horses in the early day, and they had this beautiful southern type of a mansion.
Yeah. But so you moved into there?
Yeah.
And then you didn't have to finish the school year.
That's what saved me, but it wasn't because of anything it just happened that way.
And then you got to go to a different school.
No, I went because I never took the exam.
Oh, you just transferred over from the city school.
And kept my mouth shut, and I just enlisted like I'd moved out from Sydney. I never peeped that I'd gone to school there at Big Springs, because I only went maybe 10 days or so.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my God, talk about.
So that's when you went into 8th grade.
Then I went into the 8th grade.
And you were living in.
Because I came out of the city school system at Lincoln and never had any trouble at all.
Okay.
But I had that mix-up because she'd enrolled me in school there at Big Springs, that I had to pass the county test, and I had to. I mean, it was no getting out of it. Well,
So you
by
finished.
moving and then keeping still, and I just like I'd never gone to Big Springs. See, I just kept still, and
then you got ready to start eighth grade.
Then I just entered the 8th grade, and nothing was ever said ever, but saved my sanity.
Okay.
To what I haven't lived through it, I'm telling you, there.
Okay.
Never a dull moment.
Okay, well, that's good. That's all we have time for right now. So we'll continue the